Hey guys, it's Dr. Hayes, and this is the second video of our unit that we're doing on David Levithan and John Green's Will Grayson for our class. And this specific video will be focusing on coming of age themes as they relate to the LGBT communities, because of the characters in Will Grayson who are in the LGBT communities. And so I wanted to focus on some of the factors that go along with growing up, specifically if you are experiencing sort of a questioning of your sexual identity. Now, that is a part of everybody's growing up experience, is figuring out who you are as a sexual being and your identity as a sexual being. And so, this goes in with things we've been talking about all semester about factors that um, contribute to your growing up experience. So I want to have a few comments about just general factors associated with growing up as LGBT plus, and then I have some books that I'll show you that these are all the ones I'll show you are geared toward teenagers, um, feature teenagers as characters, and they all have some sort of LGBT association with them. So, but before I go over those, let's talk about just some general concepts. So all throughout the semester, we've been talking about the impulse that sort of guides teenagers and the growing up, really the human condition in general, but it comes out in the adolescent years, and that is the questions of identity and purpose, right? Who am I? Why am I here? Identity, who am I? Purpose, why am I here? And we've been talking about that all semester with the various texts we've read. And there are variables all along that have contributed to those answers, whether it be your class, your race, your gender, um, different things contribute to the way that you answer those questions and your experience as you're growing up, and also the time in which you're born. We've talked about the chronology and how that affects coming of age trends. So this week I wanted to talk about how sexual identity um, affects coming of age and affects how you answer those questions, particularly for adolescents who experience or discover that they have what is considered an atypical minority sexual identity or even gender identity, which aren't the same thing. So that's what we're focused on this week. And so, but a lot of every teenager goes through that phase of who am I? What do I think about the world? How do I experience the world? What do I want people to know about me? What do I want people to think about me? Who is me, right? And so, figuring out um, who you are in the most quote unquote normal of circumstances is challenging and stressful and intimidating, and it's kind of a rocky road for a lot of people. So when you add on the experience of discovering that you have um, you know a minority or atypical gender identity or sexual identity, it's the same struggle that everybody goes through, but it just adds onto it, and it's variables that not everyone experiences. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. The I wanted to share some statistics. I found a study, and I'll post a link to this study in the description of the video so you can see it. But I was trying to find some research. Over the past few years, this topic has interested me. I just disclaimer: I am not a part of the LGBT plus community. I don't have any personal connection other than friends, family members, and loved ones who are in that community. And as a scholarly pursuit, it interests me because it's only within the last, I would say maybe 15 to 20 years at the most, where um, we've made a lot of strides in children's and young adult literature, with texts for LGBT readers and depicting LGBT characters. And so since that has been um, a fairly recent development in my field, I'm professionally interested in it as well. So I just wanted to put that little disclaimer out there. So over the past few years, I've been looking at research about this, and a Pew Research study. Pew Research is a massively popular and reputable research institution, but the Pew Foundation did this in 2013. They did this very extensive study about the LGBT experience, and one of the chapters, the reason I'm bringing this up, one of the chapters is all about coming out, the coming out experience, which you might be thinking, okay, but coming out, what does that have to do with coming of age? How are those the same? And what they found is what's making me want to bring it up in this video. And so what they discovered was that um, they did a lot of questioning of members of the LGBT communities of whether they're out or not, and of all different ages. And they asked them, when did you first start to suspect that you had what your gender identity or sexual identity was? When did you know for sure? And then when did you first tell people, right? Like when did you tell your parents or tell loved ones or come out, if you will? Um, they acknowledge, and I want to reiterate, coming out is sometimes a years long process that happens in phases with certain close people to you first, and then um, it branches out from there, right? And some people are partially out, where they're out to family members but not out to coworkers, or opposite, they're out to coworkers and friends but not family members. So I want to acknowledge it is a process. But what they found was it varies between, they categorized it as gay men, lesbians, and bisexuals. Those are the categories that they sort of focused on for the study, acknowledging that there's a lot of in between categories as well. But all of them, it was a pretty even stack. I'm going to see if I can show you this chart. I don't know if it'll focus. Yeah, there we go. You can kind of see it. So um, I don't know if you can see the numbers, but I'll let you know. Essentially, um, all of the members of the survey who are out members of the LGBT communities, they all knew. It's like refocusing. They all knew that they were. Yeah, they suspected that they were gay around 10 or 13. Oh, my phone went to sleep. Between 10 to 13 years old. Then they all knew that they were between 15 to 18 years old, and but then they all came out in like early 20s, 19, 20, 21, 22, something like that. That's when this is the average age, not 100% of the respondents said this. This is the median, the average age. So the average age that someone suspects that they might be gay was 10 to 13. The age that they knew it was 15, 16, 17. And then when they actually came out to, say, family members, like officially, was around 2021. And so that is right smack in where we're talking about here, the coming of age range, right? So it seems to be, according to this research, according to the survey that they did, the coming out process in the LGBT community um, goes along with, is adjacent to, and runs it parallel to the coming of age process in general. The coming out and coming of age tend to happen on average. Obviously, there are outlying situations. There are young children who know that they have an alternative gender identity, and there are people who don't discover their sexual orientation until they're middle aged. So, there are outliers, I realize, but according to the research, the average experience is that the coming out experience for LGBT um, people is synonymous or goes along with the coming of age adolescent experience. So they're intertwined. They're, unavoidably linked, these two processes. So I wanted to bring that up. There's lots of other interesting results in the survey. about like who did you tell first, who did you feel more comfortable with, how many people know. Um, but um, another couple of interesting statistics. Let me scroll and find them. Um, Most of the respondents, and it doesn't matter if it was gay men, lesbians, or bisexuals, most across the board, the majority said it was very difficult to tell their parents. This was a very difficult challenge. But also, the vast majority of them um, say, very few of them said it actually hurt their relationship with their family. The majority of them said that it was actually, they're glad they did it. They don't regret telling their family. So that's kind of an encouraging result. But one thing that I was kind of um, oh, about when I read the study was that um, let me get to there's a whole bunch of like, did you choose where you live based on your sexual orientation? How do you feel, about different regions? Do your coworkers accept you? Um, but then one of the last categories they discussed was happiness. Um, and so they they did a survey of part of one of the questions of the respondents of the survey was um, how happy are you? Very happy, pretty happy, not too happy. So um, let me see if it'll show it again on my camera. You can kind of see the top line is LGBT and the bottom line is the general public. So notice the dark green is people who say they're very happy. The general public is much. Oh, I just got to answer another face. The general public is generally identifies as much more happy, very happy than LGBT. And then the um, the middle line is pretty happy, and that's where kind of most people in the LGBT community fall. And more of them say they're not very happy than above what the general public says. So it's kind of a curious final result um, that the study calls it a happiness gap, right? There seems to be a happiness gap between um, out LGBT adults and straight adults. There seems to be um, a pretty broad deficit of LGBT adults who say they not very many of them say they're very happy. Most say they're okay, like they're fine, they're pretty happy. So that seems to be a lot of times our satisfaction with our adult life is linked with the process we go through in adolescence. And we've talked about it in class before that your job in adolescence is to grow up. Like that's your whole job is to plan for when you're going to be an adult. You've got to figure out, like, your only job is to go to school and imagine what you're going to be when you grow up. And plan for your future. Decide what college you're going to go to, decide what job you want to be, decide if you're going to get married, if you're going to have kids. You just kind of fantasize and plan about this future time when you're going to be a grown up. And that's really your only responsibility when you're a teenager. And so, to me, there seems to be a correlation between the coming out and general adolescent experience of LGBT plus youth, and then their professed lack of profound happiness in adulthood, and they're only willing to claim okay happiness in adulthood. And so I can't help but see a correlation there. The study did not propose a connection in that way because they weren't looking at it through a adolescent literature lens or whatever. But I'm suggesting that there seems to be a connection there. So I wanted to share with you the results of that study and talk about how coming out seems to be a huge part of coming of age for young people, and a lot of young people start questioning or figuring out who they are when they're as early as 10. It usually happens earlier for boys because boys are less. They said boys usually start questioning as early as 10. Girls a lot of times wait until like 13 or 14 to realize that there may be um, they might have same sex attraction because girls are more generally more affectionate with each other in a friendship way anyway. So it doesn't emerge as easily, or as obviously. That might be a better word. Um, so other than the talking about your identity with family and friends, and um, recognizing, having the self-awareness to recognize that there's something maybe different about you. Um, the growing up process for LGBT plus youth is pretty similar as far as, um, does he like me? Or does she like me? Um, Kissing is weird. Being safe if you're gonna have sex with each other. So a lot of that's very similar, but being and it's getting less and less of a not saying it's not a challenge, but it's becoming less and less of a challenge the more accepting our community becomes and our culture becomes of sorry, let me fix something here, of the LGBT plus community. I'm gonna raise my brightness a little bit. It's getting dark in here. Okay. Another factor to consider is also the trans community. So um, this is not a video that's intending to be a primer on what is gender identity versus sexual identity, sexual orientation. There are lots of videos about that on YouTube that will give you instructions about that. Generally, the you think of gender identity is here, sexual identity is here, right? And so some people are, whatever they're born with here matches what they have here, and that is cisgendered, meaning you are the gender you're born with, right? Um, then there are some people who what they have here does not match with what they have here, and that means you're transgender, right? Your gender identity and your sexual identity do not match. And then your sexual orientation is different from that. That is regardless of what you have here or here. It's who you are sexually attracted to, as it relates to what you have both here and here, right? So that's your down and dirty basic crash course. If you're curious about the difference between um, gender identity and sexual identity and sexual orientation, there are plenty of very educational, wholesome videos that will explain that to you. But that's kind of the basic. So there is starting to be some literature that features transgendered characters, and even children's books, picture books, and things. That's not what we're talking about in this video, but there are picture books that feature trans children and sort of how to deal with that. I've got a couple of books for teens that feature trans characters that I'll show you as well. So before I completely lose my light, let me show you some books. So I'm going to go through chronologically and show you sort of what kind of texts have been developed that feature LGBT characters and themes. The earliest one I have, one of the earliest ones there is this is the classic Annie on My Mind, Nancy Garden, and this is about two teenage girls in New York, and there is a class difference. One goes to a really fancy private school, one goes to a lower income city school, and that disparity between them is obvious, and it's kind of a strain in their relationship. And they are able to maintain their relationship, and they're able to see each other because there is a lesbian teacher at the school who um, has a partner, and the teacher and her partner offer their apartment as sort of a safe haven for the girls to meet up and be together, and in a safe place. Lots of other stuff happens that I'm not going to go into, but if you want to read it, you can read it. But it is a straight up teen girl lesbian romance from 1982, which is pretty amazing that there was one that early. This is the earliest one I have. It's probably the most well known um, lesbian or any kind of sort of LGBT text from that era. So it kind of, you might say it started it all. I'm sure there were gay stories and gay romance before that, but I'm talking about specifically for teens, that featured teens and was written for teens. I mean, so Annie on My Mind, Nancy Garden. That was one of the earliest. Let me just put these down here. Next, I'm going to talk 1995, I think, is when this one came out. But Jacqueline Woodson is a really well-known and well-respected YA author. She's written all kinds of things. Um, the Not all of her books have LGBT themes. Just a few of them do, but some of them have interracial couples. There's class issues, inner city. If You Come Softly is probably her most well known, and it's about an interracial couple in New York City, and the I won't spoil it, but it has kind of a shocking twist. This one I think is 1995. I said that, yeah. But this was a little bit interesting because the teenage character, who is the Melanin Son, is his name, and he writes a journal, and this is kind of journal entries of his, but he's not gay. Instead, his mother, he's sort of, as he's growing up, his mother um, comes out and discovers that she's a lesbian later in life. And so it's kind of all about how he's processing his mother's sexual identity and um, realizing that she's gay later in life. And it's sort of how they're going through similar phases of transformation, but at different points in their life. It's real interesting take on the theme. Next, I want to talk about, okay, this is the godfather of the modern gay book, if you will, the godfather of the modern gay romance, David Levithan. Right, we are reading him for class, so I have a few of his books, but I wanted to kind of talk about him a little bit more officially. I've talked about him in class already, but I just wanted to show you some of his books. His very first book, 2003, Boy Meets Boy. It's a classic. Um, there's just no getting around it. It's a classic book. It kind of kicked off a trend of 21st century LGBTYA. So LGBTYA, young adult, has become its own genre now, and so David Levithan is kind of the godfather of us all as far as that goes with LGBTYA. Boy Meets Boy was his first one, huge success. And then the very next year, he published The Realm of Possibilities. Possibility, not possibilities. And it's not every character in here is LGBT or anything in between, but several of them are. It's 20 characters, I think. Does it say 22, maybe? Um, it's several characters, and it's little vignettes about their life. 20, yes, 20. I was like, I'm sure it says, there's 20 different perspectives and characters, and some of them are gay and some aren't. But it still has his same voice. He also, as we've talked about in class, he wrote Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. He wrote Dash and Lily's Book of Dares, and he wrote Will Grayson, Will Grayson that we're reading. Here is that I'll show in class, the Hold Me Closer, the Tiny Cooper story, the musical about Tiny Cooper that he actually wrote. So I'll bring this to class and show it. And then this one was another one that he had a little bit later on, Two Boys Kissing. And this has several pairs of boys that it follows and they're in various stages of their relationship. Some are one couple's just started dating, one couple is on a quest to have the world's longest kiss, and one couple is approaching their 1 year anniversary. So there's all different kinds of phases of the gay experience in that book. And then he has one of his more recent books, Every Day, that we talked about in class, where it's the entity who wakes up in a different body every day, is another one that he wrote as well. So I wanted to show you some of my David Levithan books here. Let me go bright again. I feel like it's getting darker and darker in here as the sun goes down. Okay, so the next couple of things, there's some fantasy series I want to show you. So I don't know if you've ever read the Mortal Instruments. This is probably the most acclaimed young adult fantasy series that features it's won awards. It's won GLAAD awards, Gays and Lesbians Against Defamation. It's won awards for its depiction of the LGBT experience. And so this is as far as like doing it right, as like well done depiction of a gay couple, the Mortal Instruments series is probably the most well received. They started 2007. So the first one, the City of Bones, was the beginning. Right here, you can kind of see I have all the Mortal Instruments. These right here are prequels that came out later. These, I took this book from right here. This is the whole Mortal Instruments series, and then there's two books right here. There's a third that I don't have the physical copy of yet, but I'm going to get it. But there's a third book that takes place after the Mortal Instruments, but it's all the same universe and the same characters. Um, but there is in the Mortal Instruments and in the prequel, there is a gay couple. Well, there's a gay character, Magnus Bane. He's a warlock. He's very, very old, 1,000 years or something, and um, he's dated hundreds and hundreds of people over his lifetime and slept with hundreds of people. And he is dating, and he falls in love with one of the Shadowhunter characters, who is a boy and who's a teenager. And Magnus, this old warlock who's dated hundreds of people, Magnus is his first ever relationship. And so you have this very, very new um, person, and you have this very ancient soul, this old person, and they find love together, and it is so wholesome. And so the series tracks their relationship through all its phases: the first inkling of attraction and desire, the way they fall in love, they date, they end up moving in together, they live together, they eventually get married, they adopt children. It progresses through a whole um, very wholesome relationship, right? They are not perfect. They have flaws. They fight, but then they make up. It is a very encouraging uh, example of how a very well known, popular YA fantasy series can can depict this couple in this way. Shadowhunter, the this series has gotten lots of acclaim just for its um, great depiction of diversity in general, racial diversity, gender, sexual identity diversity, and so that's just one of the reasons why. One of the ways. I wanted to mention also something as far as LGBT goes. The follow-up series, the more recent ones, the Dark Artifices is what those are called. That series has something I've never seen anywhere else in young adult literature. Granted, I haven't read every book, I haven't read every YA book, but I have intentionally sought out titles and books about these themes, and I've never encountered one before. But this series features a polyamorous group. So if you're not familiar with polyamory, it is people who are in committed, open committed relationships with more than one person. And so polyamorous groups, usually it's like 3, 4, maybe 5 people in a household. Most of what I've encountered and experienced, with people I know and characters in books and things like that, is 3. It's a triad. It's called instead of a couple, they're a triad, a polyamory triad, and it's 3 people who are all in a relationship together. There are triads who are married to each other, who cohabitate, who raise children together, and it's not a one's cheating on the other one, and it's not polygamy like in the Church of Latter-day Saints. It's not like that, where there's one man who has multiple wives. It's not that. It is a equal, mutual relationship all around. Sometimes it's 2 men and 1 woman, sometimes it's 3 men, sometimes it's 3 women, sometimes it's 2 women and 1 man. It just really just depends. And 3 is not the only number. That's just the most common that I've encountered personally. But um, and so in that series, there is a polyamory triad develops. It's 2 boys and a girl, and the 2 boys love each other desperately. They both are desperately in love with the girl. She's desperately in love with both of them. It's a completely equal footing around the whole triangle, and that is an arrangement that exists in real life, and I've never seen it in literature at all. Why? I've seen it there's a similar situation in Outlander, the Outlander books. Those are written for adults, but Outlander has a set of twin brothers who are identical twins, and they both fall in love with the same girl, and she's in love with both of them because they're identical, and so they just all live together. And they all have a thing. But in books for teens, that this is the only one I've ever seen. If you know of other ones, or if you could tell me, oh no, there's more, you let me know for sure. But anyway, that's enough to talk about the Shadowhunter Chronicles, Mortal Instruments books. Another couple books I wanted to show you was Melinda Lowe's books. Melinda Lowe, I really first got into her because I also study and teach fairy tales quite often in my scholarship in my classes. And so Ash is a retelling of Cinderella. Get it? Ash, cinders, right? So Ash is a retelling of Cinderella, but it is a lesbian retelling of Cinderella. And so instead of Cinderella going off with the prince, there is a huntress, a woman who leads the hunt. It's getting dark. I'm about to turn on the light. A woman who leads the royal hunt, and Ash, instead of leaving the ball with the prince, she ends up falling in love with the huntress instead, and they go out together. So then there's this prequel that I recently discovered called Huntress, and it's not the same characters. I don't think I just got this actually. I haven't actually read it, but I think it takes place before. It takes place. It's a prequel to Ash, but I'm pretty sure that it's not the same because the Huntress is a position in the royal court. The leader of the royal hunt is this position. So I think this is like an earlier person who occupies that position in the court. But I'd have to read it. So if you've read it and I'm butchering it, you can let me know. But I love this book so much, and I recently discovered that it has a prequel, and I didn't know that. So I just got it in the mail yesterday, so I wanted to show it to you. But it's also a same-sex romance emerges between 2 female characters. So that's why I wanted to show you those. Let me real quick turn on the light. Did the video. Okay, now I can turn the brightness down because it's so bright. Oh, it got nighttime on me. Now I'm gonna look like a ghost because my face is so white. Okay, sorry about that. Another series that I'll show you. I just have a few more books to show you. This is a duology by Leigh Bardugo. Six of Crows is what it's called, and so the 2 books are Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. And this is it. It's just 2 books that go together. There's no other series. It's called a duology, and there is a same-sex couple in this as well, and a same-sex interracial couple. And so one thing I wanted to mention, not necessarily Ash and the Huntress, but with Lunar Chronicles and the Six of Crows, and there are other series I haven't brought up or showed, because there are some that just have LGBT characters just in the periphery. in the scenery, maybe even a trans character in the scenery. They might have have a gay friend, or a gay sister or uncle or something like that. And so we're seeing that more and more over the last 10 to 15 years, as I said, where publishers are more comfortable including characters like that in the backgrounds of texts, and authors are more comfortable um, depicting those stories as even protagonists in text. I picked mostly ones that had major characters and plot lines dealing with LGBT themes, but there are several examples of books that have just background characters that are members of the LGBT community. So I wanted to mention that as well. And Six of Crows is a good example of that, because there's an ensemble of characters, much like the Mortal Instruments. There's an ensemble of characters, and there's one gay couple amongst the multiple characters. So I wanted to bring that up. There's a few other books. Um, Aristotle and Dante discovered the secrets of the universe. This one, as you can see, it's won all the awards. The Stonewall Book Award is one I wanted to point out. It is one awarded specifically for LGBT books, so I wanted to point that out. So this book features um, two boys who, there's an LGBT love story of sorts. They're friends, and then they become more. There is a it's got diversity because of they're Hispanic, so it's got minority characters. One of the characters has a brother in prison, so there's people living with incarcerated loved ones. That's a theme. So there's lots of. This book is just wonderful. As you can see, everybody agrees. This book is just absolutely wonderful. I don't want to kind of ruin the magic of it too much, but it's just you fall in love with these two boys, the Aristotle and Dante, Ari, and Dante. So that's another one. Another one is Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda. This is the book that there was a movie, Love, Simon, that came out a few years ago, and it was based on this book. Becky Albertalli is the author. I was covering her up with my hand. And they changed the name for the movie, probably understandably, because that's kind of a mouthful. But Simon is a closeted teenager, and he comes out, he gets a pen pal named Blue at school, and he and Blue, who's a boy, they fall in love over this email, and so there's this big thing about him trying to tell his best friend about it, and he ends up coming out to the whole school, and I mean, there's a lot of there's a little bit of bullying that happens from it, but then the whole school ends up rallying around him, and it's just got this really wholesome, heartwarming ending. So yeah, if you saw the movie Love, Simon, you might not have even known it was based on a book. This is the book that it's based on, and so you might want to read it. And all of the characters in this book, what I said was Simon's friends and the characters and the teenagers in this book are um, the kind of kid that um, I would want my daughter to be. My battery's about to die, so let me show you a couple more things. A very popular series is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. It is a supernatural style series, and these are roommates at magic school, and they end up falling in love, and there's a whole series about it. And then here's a couple of trans books that I have. This one, None of the Above, Male, Female, or None of the Above. This is about an intersex character who is born with both male and female genitalia, and she's a high school homecoming queen and all that, but she ends up figuring out she's intersex. Very, very good. This one, called Luna, is about, it's told from the perspective of a boy whose brother becomes his sister. His brother is going through a transition, and it's all about his experience with that. Very well done. So before my battery dies, let me say that I hope you enjoyed this video and that this is just scratching the surface of some books that are out there. And if this interests you, I hope you will look up other books like this and we can talk more about David Levithan and Will Grayson in class. Until then, I will see you later. Have a good week.